Jacob Blackwell had always been an enigma to those around him. A renowned biblical scholar with a reputation for unraveling obscure texts, his life had been marked by a quiet obsession with the hidden corners of Scripture. But it wasn't until a fateful trip to a secluded monastery in the hills of southern France that his journey took a dark turn. It had all started with a dusty, worn manuscript. The monks who guarded the monastery had never seen a book like it. Old, yet undeniably different from anything in their collection. It wasn't the book's age that intrigued Jacob, but rather the strange symbols on its cover, symbols that didn't belong to any known language. Despite his vast knowledge of ancient scriptures, these markings were foreign to him. But they weren't just random scribbles. They seemed deliberate, carefully designed to conceal a truth. He hadn't meant to open it that day. He had only come to study the monastery's biblical relics, but when the manuscript fell open on its own, Jacob felt something stir within him, a whisper of something long forgotten. He had seen this before, the feeling of being on the cusp of discovering a truth that had been buried for centuries. As his fingers traced the delicate, ancient pages, he found the writings to be a blend of familiar biblical phrases and arcane symbols that seemed to speak directly to something deep within his soul. Among these cryptic words, he found the unmistakable description of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but not as he had ever seen them before. They weren't just harbingers of destruction. No. In the manuscript, they were described as forces within the human soul. They represented the inner battles every person must face. Conquest, war, famine, and death were not external forces, but internal struggles that, when overcome, would lead to spiritual enlightenment. Jacob's pulse quickened. The manuscript wasn't just describing the end of the world. It was describing the end of something far more personal, the death of the ego, the release from the chains of the material world. It spoke of the demiurge, the false god who bound humanity in ignorance, a theme from the ancient teachings of the Gnostics. Jacob felt his mind race as the pieces began to fit together. This wasn't just a lost prophecy. It was a path to spiritual awakening, hidden in plain sight. The more Jacob read, the more he realized how this lost prophecy was tied to the mysteries of the human soul. The four horsemen weren't just warnings of external apocalyptic events. They were allegories for the stages of the soul's journey toward gnosis, the inner illumination. The manuscript was showing him something far more profound, the keys to unlocking humanity's true potential. But as the cryptic words unfolded, Jacob's excitement soon gave way to fear. Who had hidden this knowledge, and why? The questions swirled in his mind. He had stumbled upon something far larger than he had ever imagined. The manuscript spoke of an ancient war between those who wished to keep the secrets of the world hidden and those who had been chosen to reveal them. The secrets were dangerous, and the truth was a burden. Jacob closed the manuscript, his heart racing. He needed to learn more, but he knew the path ahead would not be easy. There were forces at play that had protected these secrets for centuries. Forces that would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. As he packed his things and left the monastery, Jacob felt the weight of destiny upon his shoulders. The journey he had begun would uncover not only the forgotten apocalypse, but the truths about humanity's own hidden potential. Jacob returned home, his mind swirling with the revelations of the manuscript. He spent the following days in isolation, poring over ancient texts, searching for any clues that might illuminate the cryptic message he had uncovered. Each passage seemed to lead him deeper into a web of forgotten knowledge, with hidden meanings that only grew more complex. One afternoon, while reviewing the manuscript again, Jacob's eyes were drawn to a section that described the Vigilants, an enigmatic group of celestial beings who were said to have descended to Earth long before the time of Noah. According to the manuscript, these beings weren't mere angels. They were beings of great power, sent to guide humanity towards spiritual evolution. But something had gone terribly wrong. Instead of enlightening mankind, the Vigilants became seduced by the material world, teaching humanity forbidden knowledge, knowledge that was meant to remain hidden. This knowledge, the manuscript suggested, had its roots in the very fabric of the universe itself, revealing that the physical world was a mere illusion, a creation of the demiurge, the false god. The true God, or the pleroma, was beyond this illusion, beyond the material realm. The vigilance, once fallen, had helped humanity awaken to this false reality, showing them the power to create and destroy within the confines of the material world. But their teachings, although potent, were ultimately a trap. They kept humanity bound to the prison of the body, unable to escape the cycle of birth and death. Jacob's heart raced as he read on. This was the very core of Gnostic thought, the notion that the world we live in is a mere shadow of the true spiritual realm. The real apocalypse wasn't the destruction of Earth. It was the revelation of this truth, the awakening of humanity from its slumber. The real battle, he realized, wasn't against external forces, but against the chains of the material world, the illusion that bound the soul to physical existence. But the manuscript suggested that there was a way out. It spoke of a path, one that had been hidden for centuries, that could lead the soul to freedom. This path was symbolized by the four horsemen. They were not just agents of destruction, they were agents of transformation. In order to reach the ultimate goal, the pleroma, the state of divine enlightenment, one had to confront and overcome the forces of conquest, war, famine, and death. But this was no ordinary battle. It was a spiritual journey, a process of self-transformation. As Jacob meditated on these ideas, a sudden realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. The hidden prophecies of the Bible weren't just foretelling the end of the world, as most believed. They were describing the end of the false world of the demiurge and the awakening to the true spiritual reality. These lost prophecies, once thought to be buried forever, were now coming to light. They had been hidden by the very forces that sought to keep humanity enslaved, but now Jacob understood that the time had come for this knowledge to be revealed. He remembered the Book of Enoch, an ancient text that had been excluded from the canon of the Bible. The book described the fall of the vigilance and their subsequent punishment, but it also spoke of a prophecy, a vision of the final judgment and the transformation of the world. Jacob had always thought of the Book of Enoch as an intriguing curiosity, but now he realized that it was a key piece of the puzzle. The prophecies contained within it were not just about the end of the physical world. They were about the transformation of the soul, the breaking of the chains that had bound humanity to the material realm. Jacob knew that his research was just beginning. The manuscript had shown him a path, but it was only the beginning of the journey. There were other texts, other prophecies, and other hidden truths waiting to be uncovered. He could no longer turn back. The stakes were too high, and the knowledge he had uncovered was too important to be ignored. As he gathered his notes and prepared for the next phase of his research, Jacob felt a sense of urgency. The forgotten apocalypse wasn't just a distant event. It was happening now, in the hearts and minds of those who were ready to awaken. The path to enlightenment was being revealed, and it was up to him to help others see the truth. But he also knew that there would be those who would do anything to stop him. The forces that had hidden this knowledge for centuries were still very much alive, and they would not give up their power easily. Jacob took a deep breath and set his sights on the next step of his journey. He had found the beginning of the path, but now he needed to find the rest of the map. Jacob's journey into the forgotten realms of ancient knowledge continued as he moved deeper into the heart of the mystery. The manuscript had opened his eyes to a new world, one where the conventional understanding of the apocalypse, the end of times, was merely a veil covering a much deeper spiritual truth. The more Jacob explored, the more he began to realize that this was not a story of worldly destruction, but the revelation of humanity's ultimate potential. Days turned into weeks as Jacob studied tirelessly, piecing together fragments of ancient texts, each one offering a new insight into the forgotten prophecies. He began to uncover references to the lost prophecies scattered across the Bible, texts that were once ignored or discarded by the early church. These hidden messages were not just predictions of external events, but invitations to spiritual transformation. One text that particularly fascinated Jacob was the Apocalypse of Peter, an ancient and apocryphal gospel that had been suppressed by the early church. Unlike the canonical book of Revelation, the Apocalypse of Peter described a more personal and intimate apocalyptic vision. It spoke of the inner battles of the soul, the struggle between the divine spark within and the dark forces that seek to keep the soul trapped in ignorance and suffering. Jacob marveled at the connection between the Apocalypse of Peter and the teachings he had uncovered in the Gnostic traditions. In both, the true apocalypse was not the collapse of material world, but the destruction of the illusion created by the demiurge. The Book of Peter illustrated a vision of the afterlife, where souls could transcend the boundaries of the material realm, escaping the prison of the body and returning to the divine source from which they came. It was a liberating message, one that echoed the very essence of Gnostic thought. But there was more. As Jacob turned his attention to other hidden texts, he discovered a disturbing connection between the vigilance he had read about earlier and the mysterious forces that sought to suppress the truth. In the Book of Enoch, the fallen angels, the vigilance, were described as having revealed to humanity the secrets of heaven and forbidden knowledge. This knowledge, though powerful, was ultimately a double-edged sword. It gave humans the ability to alter the material world, to control the forces of nature, but it also bound them to the cycle of death and rebirth. The key to breaking free from this cycle, Jacob realized, was not merely in the rejection of the material world, but in the understanding of its true nature. The material world was not inherently evil. It was a reflection of a deeper, spiritual reality. The problem lay not in the world itself, but in the way humanity perceived it. The vigilance had shown mankind illusions that held them captive, but they had also fallen victim to the same illusions. Jacob's thoughts turned to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, a recurring symbol in both the canonical and apocryphal texts. The traditional understanding of these horsemen, conquest, war, famine, and death, was that they were harbingers of the end of the world. But in the Gnostic interpretation, Jacob began to see them differently. They were not merely agents of destruction. They were symbolic representations of the inner struggles that every soul must face on its journey toward enlightenment. The white horse, representing conquest, was not just a force of war. It was the conquering of the self, the overcoming of the ego that keeps the soul trapped in ignorance. The red horse, representing war, symbolized the internal battles between light and darkness, good and evil, within the soul. The black horse, representing famine, was the emptiness felt when the soul seeks satisfaction in the material world, only to find it lacking. The pale horse, representing death, was the final test, the death of the old self, the surrender of the false identity, before the soul could be reborn into its true nature. In this Gnostic view, the apocalypse was not the end of the world. It was the beginning of a new world, a world where the individual soul transcended the illusions of the material realm and returned to its divine source. The real apocalypse, Jacob realized, was the destruction of the false world created by the demiurge, the world of suffering and separation. And the key to this transformation was hidden in plain sight, within the pages of the Bible and other ancient texts. As Jacob reflected on these revelations, he began to see the Bible in a new light. The stories and prophecies that had once seemed obscure and confusing were now taking on new meaning. The teachings of Jesus, for example, had always been seen as a call to salvation, but Jacob now understood them as a call to spiritual awakening, a call to break free from the chains of the material world and return to the divine. The resurrection of Jesus, in this light, was not just a historical event. It was a symbol of the soul's potential to rise above the limitations of the body and the material world. Jacob knew that he had uncovered something profound. The forgotten apocalypse was not a future event. It was a present reality, one that could be experienced by anyone willing to awaken to the truth of their own divine nature. And the lost prophecies of the Bible were not just cryptic messages about the end of the world. They were invitations to spiritual liberation. But as with all powerful knowledge, Jacob knew that there were forces that would stop at nothing to suppress the truth. He was beginning to feel the weight of these forces bearing down on him, as if he were being watched. There were those who would not allow these secrets to be revealed. As Jacob prepared to share his discoveries with the world, he could feel the presence of something dark and powerful, something that had been guarding these secrets for millennia. He realized that his journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Jacob had uncovered truths that had remained hidden for centuries. The walls of his apartment, once filled with the quiet hum of daily life, now felt oppressive, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of ancient knowledge. His mind raced with the implications of what he had learned, the forgotten prophecies, the apocalyptic visions that transcended mere destruction, and the role of the human soul in the cosmic battle for freedom. But as he sat, his thoughts growing ever more complex, an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. He wasn't alone. The realization that these forgotten secrets were dangerous wasn't lost on Jacob. It wasn't just the powers of the material world, the governments, the institutions, that he feared. No, there was something far older, far more elusive. He began to recall the teachings about the demiurge, the malevolent force that, in Gnostic belief, shaped the material world to keep souls imprisoned within it. The demiurge, a being of distorted light, was believed to be the creator of the physical universe, but his creation was a prison, a trap for the divine sparks, the fragments of the true God that had fallen into this realm. The more Jacob thought about it, the more the connection became clear. The world as we know it, the material realm, was nothing more than an illusion, a distraction meant to keep humanity from awakening to the divine. The demiurge was not simply a figure from ancient mythology. It was a symbol of everything that kept people asleep, everything that prevented them from realizing their true, divine nature. As Jacob pieced together the puzzle, he realized that the traditional apocalyptic visions of the Bible, fire, destruction, chaos, were not just about the end of the world. They were metaphors, symbols of the end of the demiurge's dominion. The apocalypse was the final battle of the soul, the battle to break free from the clutches of the demiurge and return to the eternal divine realm. The four horsemen of the apocalypse were not just figures of doom. They were representations of the struggles that every soul must endure in its quest for enlightenment. The horsemen's arrival signaled a moment when the soul would face its darkest fears, its deepest shadows. In the struggle against these fears, the soul was meant to transcend the illusions of the material world and reclaim its divine origin. Jacob felt the truth of this revelation sink deep into his being. But with this understanding came a deeper sense of unease. He had heard whispers about the vigilance, the fallen angels who had sought to bring forbidden knowledge to humanity. The same angels, Jacob now realized, who were said to have been imprisoned by the demiurge for revealing the secrets of heaven. These angels were not evil. They were guardians of a higher truth, messengers who had sought to awaken humanity from its slumber. But in doing so, they had threatened the very foundation of the world the demiurge had built. In this hidden war between the demiurge and the forces of liberation, the true enemy was not the fallen angels, nor the horsemen, nor even the material world itself. The real battle was for the soul's freedom. The demiurge had trapped humanity in a cycle of suffering, in a world where the divine spark was hidden beneath layers of illusion. The apocalypse, Jacob now understood, was not just about the end of the world. It was about the awakening of the soul, the breaking of the chains that bound it to this false reality. Jacob felt a rising sense of urgency. The knowledge he had uncovered was not meant for just one man to carry. The world needed to hear it. The world needed to know that the apocalypse was not something to fear, but something to embrace. It was the destruction of illusion, the revelation of truth, and the reawakening of the divine spark within every human being. Yet, as he prepared to share his findings, Jacob could not ignore the looming presence of the demiurge. It was as if a dark shadow watched him, preventing him from fully embracing the truth. Every step he took felt monitored, as if there were forces beyond this world that did not want these secrets revealed. His mind drifted to the Apocalypse of Baruch, a text that spoke of a new world, one beyond the physical realm, a realm where the soul could live free from the constraints of the material universe. In this vision, the new heaven and new earth were not just a future promise. They were the inner transformation that took place when the soul transcended the material illusion and reconnected with its true essence. Jacob knew that the battle was not just a spiritual one, it was also a physical one. To reveal these secrets meant to face the very powers that sought to keep humanity in the dark. It meant challenging the demiurge's hold on the world, a task that would require not just knowledge, but courage. The journey was not one that could be taken lightly. As Jacob sat at his desk, surrounded by ancient texts and maps, he felt a sense of destiny settling upon him. This was the moment. The time to share the knowledge had arrived. But there was a heavy weight on his heart, a realization that the forces of the demiurge would not easily allow this truth to be revealed. With a final glance at the manuscript in front of him, Jacob closed his eyes. He could feel the presence of something vast and unseen, watching, waiting. The battle had only just begun. Jacob stood by the window, gazing out over the city. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the buildings below. But in the depths of his mind, he no longer saw the skyline as he once had. The world seemed distant, as if he were looking at it through a veil, a thin, fragile barrier separating him from something far more real. His thoughts were heavy with the knowledge he had uncovered. The forgotten prophecies, the true nature of the demiurge, the hidden battle for the soul. All these truths were now clear to him, yet the urgency of his mission weighed on his chest like an unshakable burden. The world needed to hear this. The veil that had long obscured humanity's eyes from the truth must be lifted. The apocalypse was not the terrifying end the world feared. It was the beginning of the soul's liberation. Jacob understood now that the coming destruction, the upheaval, was not the end of life, but the end of illusion. The world of suffering, confusion, and endless cycles was all born from the deceptive forces of the demiurge. But beyond the destruction lay the rebirth of humanity's true potential, free from the chains of the material world. He felt the familiar pang of doubt, but this time it was different. It wasn't fear of failure or misunderstanding. It was the knowledge that those who were ready for this truth would awaken. But for many, the revelation would be too much to bear. Jacob had to be ready. For the forces that sought to keep humanity imprisoned, the agents of the demiurge, would fight back. His discoveries weren't just insights into the nature of reality. They were a direct challenge to the cosmic order that had reigned for eons. And yet, there was hope. There had always been hope. Jacob thought back to the ancient scriptures, to the words of Baruch and Enoch, to the visions of the prophets. They all spoke of a time when the soul would be free. A time when the divine spark within each human would be recognized and nurtured, transcending the false confines of the material world. The apocalypse wasn't just a vision of destruction, it was a prophecy of transformation. With a steady breath, Jacob turned from the window. It was time. He gathered the manuscripts, the hidden texts, the writings that had led him to this point, and began preparing to share them with the world. He would go public. He would tell the world the forgotten truth, the prophecy of liberation that had been concealed for centuries. But as he sat down, ready to begin writing his message, a deep unease settled over him. There, in the quiet of his apartment, he could almost hear a voice, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. The demiurge was not content with being exposed. The forces of deception had not remained dormant all this time just to watch as their hold over humanity slipped away. Jacob knew he wasn't just dealing with human opposition. There were dark, spiritual forces that would try to stop him. His thoughts turned to the vigilance, the fallen angels. They, too, had once stood against the demiurge's control over the world, revealing forbidden knowledge to humanity in the hope that it would awaken the divine sparks within. But they, too, had been punished for their defiance. Jacob knew now that their rebellion was not a mere historical event. It was a cosmic struggle, one that spanned the ages. But Jacob was not alone. He had found allies in the unseen realm, those who had embraced the truth and fought against the forces of illusion. These allies were not bound by time or space. They had watched humanity's journey from the beginning, and now they were ready to assist in the final stage of the awakening. The time had come for the divine spark within humanity to shine brightly once again, to pierce the veil of illusion and transcend the world of suffering. He paused, his hand hovering over the keys. The message must be clear, the words carefully chosen. The world had been asleep for so long. The truth would be hard to accept for many. But for those who were ready, those who had prepared their hearts and minds, this would be the awakening they had been waiting for. As Jacob began to type, the words flowed from him as if guided by a force beyond himself. He spoke of the forgotten prophecies, of the demiurge and the cosmic struggle, of the forces that had kept humanity enslaved for so long. But he also spoke of the hope, the liberation, the return to the divine essence that was humanity's birthright. This was not just a call to awakening. It was a call to action. He wrote, "The end of the world is not the destruction of life, but the destruction of illusion." The apocalypse is not something to fear. It is a path to our freedom. The time has come for humanity to awaken from its slumber, to break free from the chains that have bound us for millennia. As Jacob finished the final sentence, he felt a surge of energy within him. The message had been sent. Now, he could only wait and watch. The forces of the demiurge would no doubt attempt to silence him, but he knew he had done what he was meant to do. He had brought the truth to the surface. He had shown the way to those who were ready to see. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The battle was not over, but this was the beginning of the end for the false world that had held humanity captive for so long.